Welcome everyone to our lightning talk today. It's great to see so many people here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed on a Friday morning. I'm going to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the unceded lands on which we're all meeting today, the lands of the Yuggera, Jaggera and Turrbal peoples of the South Bank, Nathan and Mount Gravatt areas, the Yuggera, Turrbal, Jaggera and Yugambeh peoples of the Logan area, and the Yugambeh Kumbamerri peoples of the Gold Coast area. And we acknowledge that these have been very rich places of deep listening and knowledge exchange over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So we are continuing that tradition today. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So as is our custom, we'll have two presenters today, roughly 20 minutes each, and then a Q&A while it's fresh. So straight after the presentation. But remember, this is a lightning talk, not just because they're quick, but because lightning can set fire to things. So let's set some fire to big thinking that might help us ponder concepts and possibly even design new research. So feel free to add things to the chat as Carolyn speaks. And Carolyn is our first speaker today, and also Stephen. Carolyn is speaking about her Horizon grant, which is very exciting to hear about, called Leading Beyond the Gate, the role of school leaders establishing schools in new communities. So I'm going to hand straight over to you, Carolyn. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Jen, I can't see the chat, but if any questions pop up that you're happy to facilitate, that would be wonderful.
I can do that, no problem. If you would like me to give you a little warning, like a 2-minute, 3-minute warning, I can do that. Up to you.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for inviting me to talk about our recently funded Education Horizons research project. I can see a few familiar names, but for those of you I haven't met, hello, my name is Carolyn, and thank you for that introduction, Jen. I'm a former primary school teacher, having spent 20 years in primary education, with over 10 of those years being in senior leadership roles, such as principals and assistant principal positions. I'm currently completing my PhD in the field of educational leadership as well, and I'm really passionate about enhancing educational practices, especially in primary education, but also about promoting meaningful collaboration between schools and families. That's enough about me. Let's dig into Leading Beyond the Gate, the role of school leaders establishing schools in new communities, which, as Jen mentioned, was successful in the most recent Education Horizons round. As you can see the dates on the screen, this is a 12-month Horizon project, and it aims to understand the experiences of school leaders establishing schools in new communities across South East Queensland, identifying their challenges and their supporting factors. I'm very excited to be working with Professor Christine Edwards-Groves and Professor Peter Grootenboer on this project. And unfortunately, they both send their apologies today. They had a supervisory meeting at this time as well. Before we dive into the specific research questions, I just wanted to share some background information with you, which will hopefully paint a picture of the significance and what I think timely nature of this research. But also for those of you who are familiar with the department's research priorities, you'll probably hear some of the connections to the current system initiatives. Across South East Queensland, we're witnessing a period of rapid urban development. Now, depending on where you are living, you might not realise that new communities are sprouting up at an unprecedented rate, bringing with them the need for new schools and educational infrastructure. What's particularly interesting and challenging is that in these new developments, schools are often the first public institution to be established, often before roads are even completed, certainly before police, before health, and other much needed family services. This puts our school leaders in a really unique position. They're not just tasked with opening a new school, which is a significant challenge in itself, but they're also often thrust into the role of a community leader and a community builder, becoming the unofficial mayor of these communities. They're navigating uncharted waters, working to establish educational excellence while simultaneously helping to shape the very fabric of these emerging communities. Now, while we have a wealth of research on educational leadership in established communities, we know very little about the specific challenges, experiences, and support needs of principals in these new community contexts. And this gap in our knowledge is significant, especially when we consider some alarming trends in educational leadership more broadly. Recent surveys paint a very concerning picture of principal wellbeing in Australia. In 2022, over 47% of principals were found to be at risk of self-harm. And that's an increase of nearly 19% in just 1 year. We also saw a 60% rise in severe burnout and distress amongst our Australian school leaders. Now, these statistics are troubling in any context, but they take an added significance when we consider the unique pressures faced by principals in new schools and new communities. So it's within this context of rapid community development, evolving leadership roles, and concerning wellbeing trends that we've developed our research project. We believe that by understanding the lived experiences of these principals, we can develop more effective strategies to support them, ultimately benefiting not just the leaders themselves, but their schools and entire communities. In drafting this application, I spent a great deal of time reading and connecting with the documents that you can see on the screen in order to ensure the application was timely and relevant for the department's system priorities. For those of you familiar with the department's Equity and Excellence document that you can see on the screen in front of you, the Department of Education has identified educational leadership and teaching expertise as a key research priority, with a specific focus on educational leadership and learning for educational leaders. Now, our study aligns directly with this priority, aiming to shed light on a critical aspect of educational leadership that has been largely overlooked. So with this background in mind, let's now turn to the specific questions our research is aiming to address. How do school leaders experience and make meaning of the complex role of establishing a new school within a new community? What are the challenges leaders face in their unique community contexts? And what forms of support do leaders draw on? What support strategies are helpful or would be most effective? Learning from the experience of others provides valuable opportunities for growth and knowledge acquisition. So in order to do this, we designed this qualitative project into 4 phases that you can see on the screen. Phase 1, preliminary preparation and participant selection. Phase 2, data collection. Phase 3, analysis. And Phase 4, report findings, with some very ambitious dates included on the screen that you can mock me for at a later date. Now, we found out that our Horizons application was successful on the 31st of May, only to realise that that date also represented the commencement of this 12-month research project. But this week we have finished Phase 1, which included submitting applications to both Department and Griffith University Human Research Ethics Committees, which have both come back as fully approved. We've conducted initial interviews with the South East Queensland Regional Director in order to determine system needs and most suitable participants and communities to participate. In our follow-up meetings with the South East Queensland Regional Director, John has been able to provide us with some contextual information regarding these communities. And from that, we've since conducted an analysis of schools for background and contextual information using publicly available information. And just this morning, Christine, Peter and I had our Queensland Department onboarding session with relevant department staff and representatives. So our next steps will see us reaching out to participants next week and actually commence organising a time to visit their school sites and to conduct the semi-structured interviews, which we can't believe sees us moving into phase 2 already. So we are on track for now, which is very exciting. So that is the Horizons project that we're working towards. And before we hand over for any questions, part of this presentation was also just to share some personal reflections as a HDR candidate who has never applied for any research grants before. So we wanted to share some personal reflections about the process, and I can see a few HDR candidates are here, and I'm hopeful that these reflections might be of some help. Having never applied for any funded research, this was a really steep learning curve for me, so I accepted any support from both Griffith University and any colleagues. For those of you that know me, you know that I'm highly collaborative by nature, so this application was significantly enhanced through collaborative efforts, but also through institutional supports. So to briefly walk you through the process, now that you understand what this research is about, you may remember the initial expression of interest from GIER came just after Christmas. So about halfway through trimester 3, where at that stage I was convening and teaching across 2 courses. So I was already running on empty, which is a really polite way to describe how I was feeling at that time. For many people, I can understand how even that timing alone may have presented as a hurdle or a barrier of even submitting an expression of interest. When the expression of interest was advertised, Christine, Peter and I met with Stephen Hodge, who led us in a conceptual discussion which proved invaluable in refining our research focus and our approach in the initial stages. Stephen was also really pivotal in connecting us with the South East Queensland Regional Director, who was then later able to endorse our application. And I think that significantly strengthened our application. Once we were successful in the first round of expressions of interest through GIER, we then had the support of GIER and were then invited to submit another expression of interest to the Office of Research, which required a little bit more detail and depth in the application in a very short turnaround time. I think it was 3 days from memory. But this process would then determine which 10 applications Griffith University would then proceed to a full application. We were then successful in that round and invited to apply for the Education Horizon schemes. I nearly had a heart attack when I saw the 60 pages of this application, and I was so relieved to be allocated a Griffith adjunct professor, Tony Townsend, to support me through the next process. For those of you who aren't familiar, Tony has worked all over the world in the field of educational leadership. He's highly regarded and extensively published and has worked, I believe he worked part-time at Griffith University about 10 years ago. So at this point in time, you can probably hear how collaborative this process has been and continued to be then moving forward, both with our conceptual conversations with Stephen and also then working with Tony, where he provided almost a reviewing and editing role with me moving forward. So Tony's expertise in reviewing the initial expression of interest and then the subsequent drafts of the application, he was able to provide really wonderful insights that strengthened the proposal. Tony and I had, I think it was one initial meeting to discuss the project, and he then worked with me just electronically via email and even Teams, sending drafts backwards and forwards, which was just so wonderful. The technical aspect of the application process, particularly the budgeting requirements, were navigated with the assistance of Robert Jones. His support ensured that the financial projections aligned accurately with the project's objectives and the grant parameters. Now, that wasn't too tricky as it's a relatively small scale project, but we were still applying for nearly $60,000. And it was really important that we got that technical details correct. And Robert met with me twice to ensure that that was accurate. But on top of that, I also reached out to Adam from the pre-awards office here at Griffith University. Now, he provided a very different perspective. He was able to look at the application with fresh eyes, knowing absolutely nothing about the background of the research, which would most likely be the case when this application was submitted. I couldn't assume that the people reading and deciding on the outcome of the application would know anything about educational leadership and or what we were trying to achieve. So Adam was able to identify any potential areas that perhaps lacked clarity within how I had written to the selection criteria. So although the time investment required for this application process was considerable, this provided me with a significant learning opportunity. And that's where I wanted to address this, possibly even just to our HDR candidates listening now or via the recording, is that I had met with my PhD supervisors and even my MEP supervisors prior to that about my career goals as a researcher or a leader within this space. So my goal this year, one of my career goals, was to develop a broader set of research skills. And a skill within research is knowing how to apply for grant applications or funded research. So I was actually okay if this research wasn't approved or successful. I thoroughly threw myself into seeing this as a learning opportunity, learning how to read and understand and draft applications, referencing system document and departmental documents and understanding their research priorities. So that as a learning opportunity was one of the main reasons why I put my hand up to write this application. So it provided a significant learning opportunity, not just about the research topic itself, but the intricacies of grant writing, but also the importance of interdepartmental collaboration at Griffith University. So this experience for me has reinforced the value of institutional support structures and the collaborative nature of educational research here at GIER. So the resulting proposal, while authored by our team, actually reflects a collective input and expertise of numerous colleagues and departments within Griffith University. So although Christine and Peter aren't here, thank you, but also thank you, Stephen, thank you, Tony, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Adam. So to finish up, this application process was a valuable learning experience. And as we move forward with this project, we carry with us these lessons and me personally, a deep appreciation for the collaborative effort that has brought us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Wow. So that was kind of like two presentations for the price of one, which was so good because we not only got the overview of the horizon or the beginnings of the horizon because it's just starting, but this wonderful, and she wasn't asked to do that. I did not pay her any money or elicit that from Carolyn. That came from the heart, which was obvious because, you know, you spoke so eloquently about that. I'm going to be quiet and open the floor for questions and comments. Please jump in. There's lots of lovely comments in the chat, which is great, saying how brilliant that presentation was, how great that information was that you shared. Any questions, though, or comments that you'd like to turn your mic on for? Tracy.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Caroline. Thank you so much for that, darling. Hello, darling. I can feel the love in the room. It's great. I'm wondering, as a fellow HDR student, how does this grant process and this whole study, how does that impact your PhD?
That's a great question. I thought there'd be more crossover than there would be, however, there wasn't. So although it's still within the field of educational leadership, I had to move to the side and invest a lot of time reading and understanding leading new communities, leading new schools. And that wasn't something that I had invested in any of my literature or other research work before. So I know and understand that school leaders are in a bad way. So the well-being aspect, I know quite deeply from my MEPS and my PhD. So I brought that lens to it. However, I'm now looking at it in a really specific educational and quite a unique context in South East Queensland. So I had to engage in quite a lot of reading during this application process, looking specifically at leading new schools. And that's where I was able to identify a little bit of a gap in our current knowledge. But no, there were a tiny couple little overlaps, but it sits within educational leadership broadly, but researching quite a different and unique context.
Great question, Tracy. Yeah, it speaks to the way, if you can bring all of these things together and align the work that you're doing over time, you build that nice track, that story about who you are, the narrative as a researcher. And that's a plug for Stephen Billett's running the first of our publications development series workshops, which is all about building your track on July 31. So check out the email and come along if you can. But that's really fantastic advice. Any more questions or comments?
Natalie?
Thanks, Carolyn. I popped it in the chat, but I'll just ask it. I noticed that you used the term new communities and not just new schools. So I was wondering, in terms of just beyond geographical communities, whether you found through that discussion that you had with the director any similarities or differences in terms of that community between the communities?
We had to, and thank you, that's a great question. So the South East Queensland Regional Director, we had to contain this research to make it manageable in a 12-month period, which is why working with him, we were able to identify 6 spots or 6 communities that we would be looking at. The reason why those communities were chosen was because they were relatively, or within the scope of the last 5 years, they had been built, staffed, and now we are seeing and understanding the impact on these school leaders. The department has pre-purchased land, for the next 10 years across all of Queensland. So part of this research, we're hoping, is that we are able to provide informed and evidence-based support and advice to the department that can better equip and support not just the school leaders, but the communities and partnerships within to have a more collaborative approach. How that looks, I'm not sure, but does that answer your question, Natalie?
Yeah. So it is starting from a geographical
yes.
context.
Yeah, and that was done quite deliberately so that we could contain this in a manageable 12-month project, with hopes to expand this dependent on the findings, as we are thinking that the research, although every community is unique and brings with it its own contextual challenges, we're hoping that there'll be some transferable support systems and policy implementation that could be applicable for all of Queensland, if not Australia. Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Marvellous. Great question, Natalie, isn't it? Yeah. What is this thing we call a community? Yeah. Now, Sue Watman has a question. This question relates to the things that surprised you, Carolyn, in the first round of data collection. Most researchers craft the research problem having an idea of what might be influencing it. So has anything surprised you so far?
We haven't started our data collection yet. We've really just started collecting the contextual information from our initial or preliminary conversations with the regional director. I think what surprises me already is within these communities, there's been a number of turnover of school leaders already, and these school leaders have only been in the role for less than 3 years. Based on my own research and knowing and understanding the wellbeing issues and alarming trends, that wasn't necessarily a surprise. However, I do want to understand at a deeper level what's going on within that specific community or context that has impacted that. So I think I was surprised to see firsthand the staff turnover. But I'm actually really looking forward to visiting these school sites next month and actually starting to conduct those semi-structured interviews to collect the data at a deeper level.
Thank you. And Tracy has her hand up again. Thanks, Tracy.
Yeah, following up, Carolyn, I'm just wondering if this question has two parts. First of all, are you connecting with previous school leaders who have done this? And then following on from your response to the last question to Sue, I'm wondering how many of those school leaders that have already moved on are actually serial starters for the department, who are their known performer principals who go in, establish a community, establish a school, and then go on and do the next one. They're like a serial starter leader in that leadership position.
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I don't have that information yet, but there is a difference between starting a school and starting a school in a community that doesn't even exist yet. So building a school in an urban area is very different from building and being part of a building process in a emerging or fledgling sort of community. So these are quite unique in that situation. But I can't disclose any of the other participant information details at that level yet, Tracy, because the participants haven't signed that sort of dotted line. But no, I am curious, and that's a great question, but there is a distinction between leading a new school to then leading a new school in a brand new community, and that's quite specific to what we're looking at.
That's a great point to leave, I think, Carolyn's presentation at, because there's so much yet to be known, isn't there? And I think it's beautifully positioned, this research, in terms of where we're headed in Australia with the housing crisis and the need to be providing new housing estates for families. This is going to be a huge and ongoing issue. So absolutely brilliant. Well done, team. Congratulations again on winning the Horizon, but congratulations to everyone who puts in a grant. It is huge work, as we know. But as Natalie said in the chat, it's a great experience to put a grant in, even if we don't win it. It's also about learning. There's so much that we learn. I've applied for grants and haven't got them. We've all applied for grants and haven't got them. The chances of getting them are slimmer than not getting them. So we just have to, keep that in mind and keep learning. And I love your attitude, Carolyn. You're always learning. We are all always learning. So that's just a wonderful way to open our lightning talk today. Thank you again.
Thank you.